No, you're listening to Words About Books. I'm Nate. I'm gonna cut that last part.
I was going to say, that's a little too on the nose.
I'm I'm joined by my co-host Ben, who is saying stuff that I'm gonna leave in, but I'm not gonna leave the thing he's referencing in. So you're just gonna have to fill in the blanks yourself. How's it going, Ben?
Oh, it's going good. I love our vague book references to
I'll bleep that part. That way, it's even more vague.
but
So today we're covering part 3 of The Burning God, which is part 3 of the trilogy, the Poppy War trilogy
can I
by
just
R.F.
say,
Kuang.
if you're here after having listened to the first 2 episodes, you're one of the good ones. You're a super fan. You are an intellectual, a gentleman, and that goes for the women as well. However you identify, you're a gentleman and a scholar, because only the true galaxy brains can put up with us ragging on a book for 5 hours, 4.5 hours at this point.
Well, in our defense, she should have written a better book.
If you're still here for part 3 after listening to the other 2 parts, you know what you're in for. I think we can skip the preamble and we can jump right in. If you haven't checked out the other 2 parts yet, you might want to do that if this is your favorite book in the world. I don't know if you're going to enjoy what we have to say about it, but I think I stand by everything we say. I think they're good criticisms, even if you disagree. And I think we should all be civil and have a fun conversation about it. That said, Nate's going to do the summary, so it might get less civil.
Yeah, so part 3. What a part 3. It sure was a part 3 to this book.
What I can say for sure is that it ended.
This is true. It definitely ended. Anyway, part 3 opens up with 2/3 of the Hesperian fleet in ruins, and the Hesperians are reconsidering being involved in Nicara because that's how the sunk cost fallacy works, Ben. If you use resources to secure this nation, but then you run into a little snag, you just pull out, right?
America could learn from the Hesperians, and I'm not joking.
I've listed some examples of real life where we just immediately pulled out when things got rough, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam. There's a French one. There's Algeria. There's India for the British. When the going got tough, you just pull out and say it's too difficult, man.
No politician had clearly staked their career on this being a good idea over in Hesperia. In Hesperia, they really analyze the cost benefit of any given situation, and when tens of thousands of your men and women have died for a continent most of your citizens could not find on a map, that's time to go. Not double down.
Yeah, there are corporations over in Hesperia that are like, oh, we're losing lives? Oh no. Oh no. We've got to get our Hesperian men and women away from that nasty continent.
The dirigible manufacturers are like, oh my god, the whole fleet was destroyed? Oh no. I'm definitely going to honor the warranty I had on those blimps. There's no way we could be contracted to make a whole other fleet. Oh my gosh, that'd be so expensive for you. We'd have to raise so many taxes. If only we had colonies. Hey, it's a problem that solves itself, dog. You tax the shit out of the colonies to finance the war to get the colonies.
Yeah, and if only we had, I don't know, let's say a group of lower middle class and poor people who can enroll in the army to supposedly have a better life that we could take advantage of. But not in Hesperia. Not in Hesperia. Hesperia is a a technological wonder. It's all upper class people all the way. And
well, I was going to say, what if that's the case? What if that's the case that Hesperia, judging, like, we're making fun of this, saying that it's not a political reality that the Hesperians would pull out, but what if it is? The Hesperians are actually a technocratic utopia, and the theme of the book. What if the crazy?
And they really are trying to spread.
What if the crazy theme of the book is
and technology?
Is that it would wind up being the right thing to do to have them take over for a minute? Wouldn't that be a weird end to this whole story?
That would be a very strange ending. If the ending was like, wow, Hesperia is actually in the right, or at the very least, we need them.
It would make it seem like this entire book was just Rin perpetuating a war for the fun of it, while the outcome was already predetermined at the end of the last book.
Yeah, it would be very strange if this entire book were just the Rin Revenge World Tour, and then nothing she did actually really had an impact at all, except for now there are just more people in graves.
Do you think Kwong got sick of the one-to-one comparisons between Rin and Mao, and like Rin and the rise of the Chinese Communist Party? And so she decided to draw the key distinction between Mao and Rin. Like the biggest difference between Mao and Rin is that Mao won. And like all of his sacrifices then seemed like they were worth it because he won.
Part of it too is like Mao seemed like he had like a brain inside of his head, and like
he had more than two emotions, angry and stupid.
Yeah, it's like Mao was like a person and Rin was like a cartoon character based on that person.
Mao was a person and Rin was Saiyan Saga Vegeta.
Yeah. Well, who made that initial comparison of, oh, it's teenage girl Mao? Like, if that was Kwong,
idea. I don't know if it was Kwong.
That one's on her.
I do remember reading...
I don't know either.
I remember reading somewhere that what I think I read was someone like Mao. And I've said this before. I think she said how someone like Mao comes to be. How somebody from humble beginnings...
They get really, really pissed off. And they just get angrier and angrier and just kill more and more people. I don't think that's how Mao came to be.
Well, no.
I think Mao had, like, charisma and people followed him. Completely unlike Rin until part 2 of the 3rd book in this trilogy. Here's the thing. I felt like the last book, The Dragon Republic, did a good job of starting to get away from the one-to-one allegory that was definitely set up in the first book. Mm-hmm. I felt like the second book was kind of its own thing, and it wasn't paralleling history, and then I don't know what happened with the third book. It feels like maybe there was an ending in mind, and they had to twist this book from the second book to the end of the third book, and so you get the result of just an unfocused mess between the two.
So before you jump into the summary, I do want to briefly discuss, because now we're at the end. Now we're going to find out what this was all about. And as you could probably guess, if you have not read the book, which I do recommend you do, I know Nate doesn't, but there's a lot of interesting...
Yeah, why read 600 pages? 650 pages. Why read like 2,000 pages because you have to read 2 books ahead of this?
There's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I do think it's still... This book is a very interesting discussion, and it is doing something interesting with the fantasy genre. It's just not a satisfying resolution in so many ways. And so I do want to mention...
Agreed.
Themes. So you would have to at least agree...
Those are for... first grade book reports. Yeah. You idiot.
So
I keep changing the grade.
I know you do. It always gets
getting
lower.
less, I think.
Yeah. Because he said 8th grade book reports. What I was going to say is we can both probably agree that one of the themes from the get-go, colonialism, that has remained a consistent theme through all 3 books.
Yeah, I would say colonialism, that's a theme. And what is it saying about colonialism, though?
That I have no freaking idea.
Because I feel like it waffles. And I feel like we could talk about this more once we get through the summary, Ben.
Yeah.
Because I got words. I feel like she waffles on what her message is.
I don't think there's any conclusions. That's the problem. The book ends. There's not a lot of conclusions. Let's get into the summary. We will talk about it more. Just as we go through the summary, keep in your mind colonialism. It's bad. I mean, it's bad. Like, it's bad, right? It is bad. We know it's bad.
So anyway, the Hesperian fleet's in ruins. The Hesperians are like, maybe we should pull out so that Rin has a chance. Rin also lost half her army and 2/3 of the civilians with her, but then we're told she has the military advantage? Question mark? And then they set a timetable to win the war in 6 months. The entire war. And then they're like, I can get soldiers together in 2 weeks. And my note just reads, since when? And again, listen to the first episode on Story Collapse. This might just be me going like, this seems highly implausible. I don't know if that's plausible. It felt weird to me. And I've never quite been on board with Kwang's depiction of war because 1, she hasn't been in a war. 2, I don't think she's studied a whole lot of war. I don't think she's written about a lot of war.
Here's the weird. I'm gonna actually say something here. Here's the thing.
Okay.
People might not know about Nate, because Nate plays a little bit of a character on this show. But I'm gonna break the fourth wall.
What?
I'm gonna break the fourth wall, and I'm gonna tell you something about Nate.
You said that. I told you this in confidence, Ben.
Nate is actually a huge history nerd. Much more of a history nerd than I am, has read more history than I have. He secretly loves reading history. He plays nothing but history spreadsheet games. It's actually very nerdy, how into history he is. So it's not just him being pedantic when he says that this stuff bothers him. This is a man who cares very much about logistics. But I'm interested to know, when you're quoting the 2-week time frame, you're not just talking about 2 weeks to train a soldier, right? You're talking the shaman time.
It's 2 weeks to train the army and some shaman, and then 6 months to win the entire war.
Because I could believe if you were going with the South's initial plan of, we got population for days, I'm going to give you a 2-week crash course on sticking the pointy end of the sword into the other guy. Good luck. If you die, somebody else pick up that sword and do the same thing. What blows my mind is that she's going to, in 2 weeks, train magical special forces.
I actually have this down here. I never understood that because it seemed like it required a lot of training and a spiritual journey just to get to the Pantheon, and not just being a superstitious, drugged up asshole. But here we are in this book where Rin is like, let's just do the psych but worse, and we'll get tons of drugs with these recruits. And yeah.
The very little background we get on Shaman in the first book is, if I remember right, each of those shaman that we have a background on, you have Chagan and Kara, who were trained from birth to connect to the Pantheon and the world beyond. You've got Alton, also trained from birth. You've got a few...
Do you remember the shadow guy?
I don't remember his backstory.
in the brief moment he was like alive on screen, he was thinking about how his former master took him into a completely pitch black labyrinth and left him there and said, "You will become the master shaman if you can navigate your way out, and if you can't, you're going to starve to death later." And that was his final test. So it seemed like he probably trained for years and years and years, and he had a master who trained him in the art of this shadow god so that he could be a master of shadow fu.
Yeah.
Right?
I got the vibe that all of these people were from like out of the way villages or something that still had a strong religious tradition. And that's how
you had other shaman who were, they're like, "Oh, don't go into those forests. There's a witch in there." And the witch would get a new recruit and be like, "I'm getting old. I need to pass on the old ways, and you're going to be my pupil." And, that kind of thing is the vibe I got. Like, you're going to train for years and years, and it's not just so that you'll have safeguards in place so you don't go crazy. Because when I heard this, my thought was, in the first book, when the Muganese invade, why didn't Daji just grab all the drugs she could, rounded up a bunch of peasants, and go, "Here, do a bunch of drugs. I'm going to throw wave after wave of magic shaman at the Muganese. You're going to basically spend yourself killing all of them, and then I'll cull you." Like, she could have won the war by just throwing magical bombs at people.
Yeah, or Zhang's warning of there are worse things than getting colonized and losing a war. And one of those worst things is a god taking over a human body, becoming immortal, and not being in the Chulu Korik.
Yeah, the end of the world, basically. I mean, can you imagine if Rin were taken over, she'd be dropping literal, actual nuclear bombs. I shouldn't say literal, it's metaphorical, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, because what she does is actually orders of magnitude more destructive than a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, she destroys an entire island and basically wipes out an entire people.
Yeah, the nuclear bomb wiped out cities. She wiped out the main island of, let's just say, Japan. For a weird comparison I pulled out of nowhere.
According to the website, Ben, they're not the same. Even though they are both the exact same shape, except for Mugen is...
It bends the other way. Somebody did the horizontal flip tool.
100. Yeah, exactly.
I did want to talk about this because this was... By the time I got to part 3, I was like, okay, let's just see where this goes. I don't think Kwong was all that interested in shamanism or the fantasy elements of this series by the time she sat down to write this book.
100% agreed.
And if she was, big miss. It really feels like she stopped trying.
Well, she actually asked the question. One of the characters that Rin is training to be a shaman says, "How do we choose a god? Or does it choose us? Did the fire god choose you because you're a Spearly, or..." And then he gets cut off, and then we never address that question at all, ever. I feel like that's actually a good question. How do you choose a deity to worship if you don't give a shit about the spirituality? Like, what? How does that work? And if you're not going to answer the question, that's fine. Why did you bring it up?
It occurred to me for the first time, I don't know why I didn't think of it earlier, that she is making fun of herself and the things she just decided not to engage with anymore. There's no way that Jun comment, "By the way, Jun died," there's no way that was not intentional. She knew people cared about June.
Was intentional.
She knew people cared about what was going to happen with June, and she was like, "Yeah, we're not doing that." And
just kill him in the last one, then. Why do you keep letting him escape? And then you're like, fuck it, he's gone. Yeah, you know that Chagan thing? I don't care about it anymore. Kasegi? Who? I don't know who that guy is. He's gone. She literally she wrote a bunch of stuff for the previous book and then was like, "I don't want to do that, so, like, let's just conflict over. Done. I Thanos snapped them out of existence.
There's a couple of these comments. There's when she says, I baked him into dumplings. And Jiang goes, you fucking what? That's the actual quote. And then there's the Jun comment. There's the Chagan just, united the clans off screen, whatever. We're not doing that. Then there's, does the god pick you or do you pick the god? Or like, what, blah, 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 blah. And she's basically saying like, ha, 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 I don't care. That's the response. Yeah. I think it's supposed to be a joke. I think it's actually intended to be a joke that she's decided, I will not be addressing these issues. These are issues people care deeply about. Let's all have a laugh together.
But you still brought back the trifecta. Why?
Oh, well, I actually even have...
Why are you mixing fan service with the antithesis of that? Where you just shit all over that.
Well, you know how we were talking, this occurred to me when I was editing the last episode. When we were talking about, I said something like, I'm 34 years old, I don't care about this who would win, Rin or Goku bullshit. I think that's the thought she had. I think she was like looking at these like, oh, I wonder what this god can do. And I wonder like, this is my god that I would invent. And these are the power sets I'd give it. I think she was looking at that stuff and going like, who fucking cares? And I think she's making fun of those people. But what blows my mind is I think those are the only people who are going to like this. Because anybody who's I was going to say, those are the
people who are probably giving her 4 and 5 stars.
Yeah, those are the people who are so easily emotionally manipulated into being attached to Rin as a character and being invested in her pain when she's started off as, I've never seen an author do this, I don't think, where a character started off as a well-rounded 3-dimensional person and devolved into a 1-dimensional character. And it was the main character. It blows my mind like every time we talk about this, it blows my mind how off track this went. And I just don't know. It's so weird. Like you can just tell how done with this she was. And I think...
Okay, so you are agreeing with me that it came off that she was done with this entire thing.
I think
I am, and maybe I'm not being very nice here, and maybe I'm being just a little mean because I was invested in the first 2 books, but this came off to me like season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones, where it's very clear that the writers are like, I just want to finish this and get my obligation over with so I can move on.
I think she still wanted to do a good job. I think she put a lot of effort into ending this well. But I think when it became apparent that certain things were not going to fit, there were 2 options here. There were either change your planned story significantly, or this has to be longer and more complicated.
So she did the anti-George R. Martin, where instead of expanding his 3-book series into 7 and maybe, 10, because who the hell knows, even if he ever finished it, he might decide he needs more books. She went, nope, it's 3 and it's staying as 3, and we're going to just compress as hard as we can.
I do think she consciously chose not to address certain things. She's like, I'm dropping the Jun plotline. I'm already at 600 pages. I'm dropping any further exploration of the Pantheon. I'm already at 600 pages.
Better way to do it.
Drop the Long March.
There's a better way to do it. And
drop the part 1.
Well, first of all, drop the Long March and part 1, okay? That frees you up like, 250 to 300 pages? But also, look, I'm fine with you just saying someone says that there's some massive tribal conflict going on up north, and we don't see Chagan again, but we know that he's fighting. Fine, whatever. it's just weird that he just appears and he's like, yep, I'm the leader of all 100 tribes. It's never been done before. I did it in like 2 months. No big deal. It's like there's levels of not addressing it or wrapping it up.
I could give you that if that was the only thing like that. If you wanted to have Chagan do that, go nuts. But then you got to fully deal with this trifecta stuff. You can't have both of those just get wrapped up in a nice little bow at the same time off screen.
The trifecta were completely f***ing changed. One will die, one will sleep forever, one will rule. You've already dealt with 2 members of the trifecta. Yeah, you didn't need to bring Zhang back. You didn't ever need to bring back what's-his-nuts, the Dragon Emperor. I don't even remember his name. I'm not going to go look it back up because he's so unimportant. And it's just like, they weren't set up as coming back in the second book. They were, in fact, the opposite. They were set up as not being in the story ever again. You didn't need to bring them back. I'm saying that there was a way she could have utilized these 600 pages to address the things that needed to be addressed instead of just, let's have more revenge pornography of Rin. This time Rin's going to blow fire down his throat. This time Rin's going to torture the nun. This time Rin is going to, oh gosh, she's going to just burn the city down even though they surrendered. Oh.
So, like, you know me. If this were just torturing nuns and blowing fire down people's throats, I'd have enjoyed it. I was ready for revenge porn. Kill Bill this. Let's do it. Let's just have Rin exacting bloody vengeance on every person who ever wronged her until finally someone has to put her down like Old Yeller. It's the slam dunk that you could do. That's all the series needed. You could just come in, slam dunk this thing with Rin just blowing people out of the water until finally it's too much and they gotta kill her. Or like Kite's gotta off himself to kill her. And that would have been the easiest thing in the world to do. But instead, you got this weird mess of, F you, I'm not doing the shamanism thing anymore. And I'm going to tell this joke because I thought of this joke and I'm very proud of it. And I want to get it on mic that becoming a shaman turned into dark fantasy Peter Pan. You sprinkle a little bit of opium dust, think your most miserable thought, and fly off into the pantheon. That's all it takes. and then, bizarrely, out of nowhere, introducing the plot thread that Rin might be Spearly royalty and also the bastard daughter of Zhang. And then not discussing that at all and then announcing you're not going to write another book in this series. So that's why I said it almost demands more books, because it was like, okay, time to wrap this up. Here's 5 new questions.
Well, Ben, I don't know if I mentioned this on mic or not, because I know I've told you enough times. This felt like Part 2 and Part 3 were completely different books, and Part 1 was filler that serviced neither. So you got this weird, disjointed mess of a book, and just pick Part 2 or pick Part 3 and make that your entire book and flesh it out. And get rid of Part 1.
I love Part 2. I defended it. I would defend it again. Part 2 and the last 20 pages of Part 3 carried this book to 3 stars for me. Everything else
Again, I went 2.5 and rounded down.
Everything else, to borrow your phrase, is kind of garbage. I hate to be that dismissive of it, but we're on Part 3, so it's just us and the fans now. So
yeah, all 3 of you. Thanks for sticking around.
Well,
we destroyed our podcast career.
Well, the thing, and I've said this before, and I say this every time we talk about it, is Kwong is such a good writer. She has such an interesting voice and such an interesting perspective that it's just doubly sad that this whiffed so hard. Because, like, I still want to read her new book. It's just, you're right. I feel like she was done with it. And I do think she worked very hard, but I also think she had a limit. I just think she had a certain amount of brain power and time she was going to devote to making this work. And I think within those parameters, she worked as hard as she could, but she was not going to let this book go over time or over budget. She was not going to ask for more time. She was not going to ask for a fourth book. She was just going to get it done, and she got it done. And I do think she tried very hard, but I think she lost Rin, to be perfectly honest. I don't think she really related to Rin anymore. I don't feel like she identified with Rin. I feel like she identified 100% with Neja.
Yeah, because Neja was rational, cool guy who was willing to compromise in places where it made total sense to compromise instead of viewing the world as black and white.
Well, I think when she was 19, she was Rin. She was young, determined, and like just full of anger for the injustices of the world. And then when she was 24, she was Neja, mired in complicated problems, trying to make the compromises that needed to be made to make everything run in everybody's best interest, and just bogged down by stupid, selfish people who refused to do what it took. And I think I think that's why the book ends. The book was always going to end with Rin dying, obviously. But I don't think necessarily that the book was always going to end with Neja ruling.
Now, I agree 100% with that. Anyway, let's get back to the summary, because I literally got like 2 paragraphs in before you were like, hold on. Let's talk about the end game.
I need to exposit.
So does Chagan, Ben. Chagan needs to sit down with Rin for a very, very long time and explain the entire plot of Part 3 and the objective of Part 3. Rin's got to go kill Neja's dragon that resides in a grotto near Arlong. So go get him. Also, he talks about all this other bullshit, but like we just said, Kwong didn't care, why should I? So let's move on. I also love that Rin, she thinks about all the psych members who died, but like only the ones that she remembers. She doesn't remember the water bucket guy or the fox guy. I don't even know their names. I don't even care.
I remember Aracha was the water bucket guy.
So yeah, Rin, she's trained shaman. It's really easy and just requires a little bit of drugs and a little bit of sadness. Yeah. She trains 4 shaman. One is Poison Girl, who was the sexually assaulted girl from earlier. One
and a cannibal.
One is the Great Turtle, who was buried alive kid from earlier. One
Don't yet take that pin out of him.
Yeah, there you go. One is Healer Woman. I don't think she was introduced until just now. And one is dead because he got poisoned to death by Poison Girl, and he died horribly and retching. So we just got 3 now, and also Rin. Form up the Fantastic Four. And they spend a long time training their powers, and
like 3 days.
Well, it's a long time in page length. How about that?
Who was the Poison Girl's god?
Who cares? They never mentioned it. Who cares? Ben, this okay.
Hang on,
I'm gonna
get Poppy War Wiki. What is there a good name for it?
Ben, you're being one of those fans. It doesn't fucking matter what god does what. I'm more interested in where does the Maker fit in? That is an interesting philosophical question. Is the Maker a real god? Is the Maker perhaps one of the Pantheon? Or is the Maker beyond the Pantheon? I don't know, Ben. That's an interesting question. I don't give a flying who Poison Girl's deity is because it doesn't matter.
I think the answer to that question
worship
is
the deity.
The Maker is not a real god. I do think that's the honest answer. I don't think Kwang had any plans for the Maker whatsoever. I think it is a false god made up by the Hesperians.
Yeah, I think that you're right, and I think that that's dumb. Like, oh yeah, it turns out you just are believing in the wrong religion. There's a true religion. It's these things. You're wrong.
I think it's valid. I think it's a valid thing to say about that, but it's if you.
She didn't care about the philosophy.
Yeah,
of
she didn't
the
do anything
stuff she
with
was
it.
making up. She brought up that interesting question in like a sentence in the second book, and it was never discussed or explored ever again. So that was my fault for even believing that would ever be addressed again. When Rin was like, "Wow, this whole Maker thing. Okay, the racism's not cool, but I do like the idea of an afterlife and like the do good unto others thing. And I wonder if the Maker is part of the pantheon." Or I think she was like, "I wonder if there's something beyond the pantheon." It's like,
Ren,
okay,
Ren, I'm just going to sit you down here since we're having these meetings together for a few moments, and I'd like to give you some literature, some light reading. Here's a copy of Dune by our greatest prophet, Frank Herbert. In this, he's going to discuss the finer points of monotheistic Abrahamic religion, and if you get through that, there's a lot more.
so yeah, Rin trains the X-Men 10 miles away from camp. Or, no, a little less than 10 miles, because Kite and Rin's range is 10 miles. Like, their spiritual bond only lasts 10 miles. That's a thing. And, she stares off into the distance with tears in her eyes, Ben. She thinks about Zhang, her mentor, and possibly her father, but she doesn't think about that. And she says, "You were always a fucking coward." And my note just says, "Fuck you, Rin. That dude literally saved your life at the cost of his mind and his life. And you're shitting on him for wanting you to not become a monster that has to think about how she can't put into reality all these horrible things that she's done, or she'll shatter."
So here's the thing. Last episode I said that I understand you're not supposed to like Rin. And I agree that is intentional. But I think the problem is I don't like Rin for reasons that I don't think are intentional. So this is a great example of that. I think what Kwang is trying to say here is that Rin thinks Zhang is a coward because he couldn't finish what he started, and he developed a conscience. And you're supposed to not like that because that's not a moral opinion to have. I don't like Rin in that moment because that doesn't make any goddamn sense. Like, I get why I'm supposed to not like it. I get what she's trying to say. But it doesn't make any sense for Rin at that moment to think that thought.
No. Because he literally overcame that cowardice and saved her life and bought her this opportunity that she has right now.
Yeah.
He gave his life and his mind to allow her to continue on.
You're allowed to think Zhang is a coward when he refuses to leave the Chulu Korok to help you. And she did. And I understood that. That makes sense. You're allowed to think Zhang is a coward when he asks you to kill him and don't wake Riga. I understand that because it seems like he's not willing to do what it takes to save his people. But when you're doing the thing he died enabling you to do, he no longer disagrees with you. He believes in you. That's why he saved you. So it doesn't make sense at this point to think he's a coward. That's just a cheap shot to remind us that Rin's a piece of shit. And I think that's really ham-fisted and clumsy. And again, I don't like Rin because she's rejecting pacifist ideals and becoming a militarist. I don't like Rin because she's stupid. And that's a stupid thought to have.
Stupid and angry. Those are her two thoughts, sometimes both.
Often the dumbest are the angriest. See Trump
You
supporters.
want me to talk about this thing where Rin tells Poison Girl you can make sure nobody ever suffers like your sister? and then and then and then it's like, you know that there's probably wide scale levels of people suffering exactly like your sister because of the things you are doing.
I do.
You are destroying order and imposing chaos on a system, and then you're just kind of hoping that nobody commits any sexual assaults or nobody starts killing neighbors to get what precious few resources are left in the wake of your horrible destruction.
Well, and you don't think women are not being forced to sell their bodies when they would rather not, for food and security in the chaos you've created by destabilizing entire regions again?
No,
for a war that has no ideals behind it, and you have absolutely no idea what you're going to do when you win.
It really does have no... You're absolutely right. It has no ideals. Rin's entire thing is, I'm just going to kill more people and then I'll win. Checkmate.
She begins to have a vague anti-colonialist perspective, but that only comes after she worked for the colonialists for an entire book without question. So it's not like... She doesn't like the way they talk to her.
No, Ben. No, Ben. It's worse than that. It wasn't without question. She realizes as that book goes on that things are not going to go the way Visera is pretending they will, and that the Hesperians will definitely turn on her. She just didn't realize how hard that they would turn on her and how bad it would be for the country.
So I think it's worth mentioning that Rin has one moral: no rape. And hey, if you got to pick a moral, if you got to pick only one, not a bad one to pick.
Agreed.
I just wish it had been addressed that at the moment, Rin is probably the leading cause of sexual assault in the nation. And it doesn't, I don't say that in any way to excuse the people committing the acts. There is never an excuse to commit the acts. But one of the things about war is that it brings out the absolute worst, or people who always were waiting for their opportunity to do that begin to seize it when you totally remove any kind of law enforcement from the scenario. There's no stability, there's no food. This is not going to do good things for women's rights. And that's never interrogated. Rin never goes back to an area she quote unquote liberated and sees what she's done. It's interrogated like so much of the book. In the last 20 pages, somebody finally brings it up. Like Rin says something like Golanice, and Nuja finally calls her out on it. And he basically says, you say Golanice the way certain people say 9/11, as if just invoking the name of a tragedy validates every point you're making. And what you're doing is going to be worse than 1,000 Golanices. And Rin has no defense for that. Because it's absolutely true.
Yes, exactly.
And so I guess at the tail end, in one sentence, it's interrogated. And I know I'm not the person to tell anyone how to write on this topic. I just found it strange. This is the one thing they do to humanize Rin. And again, this is still like, this is another moment where it's like, I don't like Rin, not for the reasons you want me not to like her. I don't like Rin because she doesn't even understand the ways she's hurting people. Like, yeah, Rin's not personally going to rape anyone, but Rin is the biggest enabler of rape in the region at the moment.
Let's keep pushing on that. Your army's on the march. They come to a town whose nickname is the Whore.
Yeah, that really bothers you.
I think that it probably wouldn't have bothered me if this book were a book that I enjoyed. I think, okay, whatever. But it just came off as a teenage edgelord name.
I don't think it was as edgelordy, but okay.
I'm willing to admit it's probably not a big deal at all. So Rin thinks of Sun Tzu, or whatever his name is in this universe. I'm not going to look it up. Sun Tzu. So he's like, hey, you should take a city intact because a highly destructive campaign favors no one. And my thought when I read that out loud was, and Rin's not going to follow this up. And Rin is just going to ignore the advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the book actually says, Rin's not taking that advice today. She wants to cut Neja off from the town's economy. And she herself is like, well, if I can't have it, he can't have it either. But you could have it.
Yep. Well, no,
you could easily have it. What are you talking about? I'm sure this town would pay you a lot of money to not kill them.
She reckons that she doesn't have the troops to hold it.
That's okay. You've got magic. Once you display what you can do, they will probably pay you a cartload of gold to just go away. Done. Instead, she's like, I'm just going to destroy it. Let me reiterate that. This is a civil war, Ben. Mm-hmm. She wants to claim this country as her own, and her plan is to burn a town down full of her own people.
See, this is where having a philosophy like
or
Mao,
wave after wave of Southerners.
If you were Mao, you could say, look at these decadent bourgeois capitalists. Let's get them, boys. And then you would have an excuse for why you just destroy them without remorse.
And you, the reader, would be able to dissect that and go, is this really right, what she's doing? Yeah, she's redistributing the wealth at the cost of these people's lives. Is that a good thing? You could debate, like, it's gray. It's shades of gray. Here, it's black and white. She's doing an evil thing. She's killing her own people just because she can't think of another way to not kill them.
But this is another instance of, it's not portrayed that way. I don't think Kwong knows it's evil. Do you?
Well, it follows up with they surrender and she continues to kill them. And she's like, oh shit, those are a bunch of white flags. I've been killing people for the last half hour all on my own.
Yeah, Rin realizes she's the only one still fighting. But, yeah, we're supposed to not like her for that. But why was Rin accepting surrenders in the first place? She doesn't have the troops to hold this, right?
She has wave after wave of Southern people, except sometimes she doesn't. But here's the thing. Again, Ben, you can go up with your magic shaman, you could blow a hole in the wall.
She did.
And you can send them another message. She didn't do that. She blew a hole in the wall, and then she sent her troops in to kill everyone. You could blow a hole in the wall and say, hey, you don't have a wall anymore. If I march in there, I will kill everyone. And they will say, we surrender. Here's a cartload of gold. Here's our town magistrate's son or whatever. You can hold them hostage so we don't betray you. There's a number of ways you could get this town taken care of without killing half the population, burning down all the fucking shelter.
I 100% agree with you. I'm just going to ask you this question because I honestly don't remember. Was it not her intention to burn the town to the ground because she couldn't hold it?
She wanted to burn it to the ground. I believe the book says to make a statement, which is horrible.
So why is she accepting surrenders?
That's a good question, Ben. She wants to burn the town down to make a statement, but she stops burning it to the ground because they surrender, and so she stops eventually.
This is why I said I don't think Kwong knew what she was doing. This is why I say we're supposed to not like Rin because she didn't accept the surrender and she kept burning people. And even Rin's like, oh, that's a whoopsie-daisy. But
you're right.
We're
she
supposed
did just
to
burn it to the ground.
We're supposed to think Rin is a cool, bucking the old system genius for not following the advice of that old man Sun Tzu and his old way of thinking that doesn't work in this modern world of dirigibles and magic men. And it's like, I think that was supposed to be Rin thinking outside the box and being revolutionary. And we were supposed to kind of be like, yeah, she makes the tough calls.
I thought it was her being just a